Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Helena Blavatsky, who was not a Nazi, and her work of Isis Unveiled. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Unconventional Bible Study 161 videos where I detail my leaving of Christianity. Take it as you will. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Isis Unveiled with Part 2, Chapter 12, Part 1. Let's go. My vast and noble capital, my Daitu, my splendidly adorned, and thou, my cool and delicious summer seat, my Shangtu Kaibung. Alas, for my illustrious name as the sovereign of the world, alas for my Daitu, seat of sanctity, glorious work of the immortal Kublai. All is rent from me. Colonel Yule in Marco Polo. As for what thou hearest others say, who persuades the many that the soul, when once freed from the body, neither suffers evil nor is conscious? I know that thou art better grounded in the doctrines received by us from our ancestors, and in the sacred orgies of Dionysus, than to believe them. For the mystic symbols are well known to us who belong to the brotherhood. The soul does not suffer when it leaves. The problem of life is man. Magic, or rather wisdom, is the evolved knowledge of the potencies of man's interior being, which forces are divine emanations, as intuition is the perception of their origin, and initiation or induction into that knowledge. We begin with instinct. The end is omniscience, a Wilder. Power belongs to him who knows. Brahmanical Book of Evocation. It would argue small discernment on our part were we to suppose that we had been followed thus far through this work by any but metaphysicians, or mystics of some sort. Were it otherwise, we should certainly advise such to spare themselves the trouble of reading this chapter, for although nothing is said that is not strictly true, they would not fail to regard at least the wonderful of the narratives. They would not fail to regard the least wonderful of the narratives as absolutely false, however substantiated. To comprehend the principles of natural law involved in the several phenomena hereinafter described, the reader must keep in mind the fundamental propositions of the Oriental philosophy, which we have successively elucidated. Let us recapitulate very briefly. First, there is no miracle. Everything that happens is the result of law, eternal, immutable, ever active. Apparent miracle is but the operation of forces antagonistic to what Dr. W.B. Carpenter, F.R.S., a man of great learning but little knowledge, calls the well-ascertained laws of nature. Like many of his class, Dr. Carpenter ignores the fact that there may be laws once known, now unknown to science. Second, nature is triune. There is a visible, objective nature, an invisible, indwelling, energizing nature, the exact model of the other, and its vital principle, and above these two, spirit, source of all forces, alone, eternal, and indestructible. The lower two constantly change, the higher third does not. Third, man is also triune. He has his objective physical body, his vitalizing astral body, or soul, the real man, and these two are brooded over and illuminated by the third, the sovereign, the immortal spirit. When the real man succeeds in merging himself with the latter, he becomes an immortal entity. That is not true. Right? There is a trinity, right? She hit it even. It is the body, which is the temple of God. It is the soul, which is the individualized piece of God that is piloting the body. And the Holy Spirit, which is literally every single atom in existence. So you are formed out of the Holy Spirit. These glasses formed out of the Holy Spirit. This tea formed out of the Holy Spirit. Everything is from the Holy Spirit. The soul, the individualized portion of God that is you, that makes the decisions for the 5D, right? That part is already immortal. It was somewheres prior to being here. It will go somewheres when it leaves here. We are here for the experience of being here. We have chosen to be here. We can choose to be chosen while we are here. But the soul is immortal regardless of what you do. It is immortal no matter what you do. Your body is not. You cannot extend your life beyond God's will. It will not happen. It doesn't matter what elixir you brew. It doesn't matter what spells you incant. It does not matter what designs you draw on the ground. It does not matter what stones you keep around you. Your body is going to go away. You are here for the experience, so live the experience while you are here. Your soul is immortal. You will never be. Right? So the real man succeeds with merging himself with the latter and becomes an immortal entity is false. You are already an immortal entity. You have a form of amnesia that keeps you from realizing that until you realize that. Back to the text. Fourth, magic, as a science, is the knowledge of these principles and of the way by which the omniscience and omnipotence of the spirit and its control over nature's forces may be acquired by the individual while still in the body. Magic, as an art, is the application of this knowledge in practice. Now this I do agree with, mostly. It is a science. You can learn to do it. It is something that I practice. If you were unaware, if this is the first time you run across my video, I'm going to tell you, I practice magic. It is the direct manipulation of the electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the Holy Spirit. Everything is the Holy Spirit, and you can manipulate pieces of that. Now, the pieces that I manipulate are all internal. Most people will dismiss that, but I have the fruit, so to speak. As a matter of fact, to speak. The fact that I can speak, the fact that I can talk to you right now in this tone of voice is because of me practicing what I am talking about. It is the results of me putting into action magic, manipulating the electromagnetic forces of creation in the way that God himself has shown me to do it. It is your birthright just as much as it is mine. It is something that requires discipline. It is something that you have to acquire. But you can do it. I did it. I not only healed my voice, which you can go back and check out in the videos. I healed my shoulder, which you can go back and check out in the videos. But as of today, I am 33 days tremor free. 33 days without any of the muscle spasms that have plagued me for the last 13 years. Yeah, something like that. 13 years. So when I talk about these things, it is not something that I am just speculating about. It is not something that I read somewheres and then tell other people with no practical application. It is something that I have done in my life. It is something that has affected change in my life. Now, I still have to talk right here. This is the lower end of my range, right? Not all the way to the bottom like this is, but this is getting better every single day. And sometime this year, I'll be able to do this entire video in this tone of voice. My vocal cords are strengthening every single day as a result of what we're doing here and the manipulation of the magic. It is literally healing me. You can heal you. You can affect things outside of yourself too. There are consequences to that. And if you would like more information on how I have done this and how you can do it too, the Infinite Integrations playlist will get you there. Magic is real. Don't let nobody fool you. And it is not evil. Don't let anybody fool you. Now, you can use it with evil intention, and that will have consequences, so you better be careful. Right? Levels of responsibility absolutely do apply. 5. Arcane knowledge misapplied is sorcery. Beneficently used, true magic or wisdom. Mediumship is the opposite of adeptship. The medium is the passive instrument of foreign influences. The adept actively controls himself and all inferior potencies. That would make me an adept, right? All things that ever were, that are, or that will be, having their record upon the astral light or tablet of the unseen universe, the initiated adept, by using the vision of his own spirit, can know all that has been known or can be known. Races of men differ in spiritual gifts, as in color, stature, or any other external quality. I don't know that I agree with that. Among some peoples, seership naturally prevails. Among others, mediumship. Some are addicted to sorcery and transmitted secret rules of practice from generation to generation, with a range of cyclical phenomena more or less wide as the result. Now, when I say I do not necessarily agree with that, it is because there is incomplete knowledge. So far as I know, I am the only one that has actually affected any healing whatsoever in themselves using magic. That is not necessarily true. I am ignorant of anyone else. In much the same way, I am ignorant of if anybody else can do it. I assume that anything I can do, you can do too, and better. Right? I say that. Anything I can do, you can do better. You can do everything better than me. Right? That is literally my attitude. I am in a learning phase of my life, have been for several years, but I double down on that these days. I am constantly looking for more and more education. One of the things that I don't know is whether anybody else can do this, because nobody else has demonstrated to me that they can. It could be because of my skin color, though I highly doubt that. It could be because of my eyes. If you were unaware, I don't know if you can see it. Let me swap it around so you can get a good look at my eyeball. Can you see it? It's two different colors. It's called heterochromia. That is, I have an iris, and then the part around it is a different color. Right? What part of it's gold, part of it's green. That may be the reason. It might be because I'm left-handed and I'm walking the left-hand path. That could be the reason. There are all kinds of various factors that I do not have enough data to narrow down. But I assume that everybody can, and I do not assume that anybody else is completely different because of the color of their skin. That is the most arbitrary and ignorant of ways to divide people. Back to the text. Ninth, one phase of magical skill is the voluntary and conscious withdrawal of the inner man, astral form, from the outer man, physical body. In the cases of some mediums, withdrawal occurs, but it is unconscious and involuntary. With the latter, the body is more or less cataleptic at such times, but with the adept, the absence of the astral form would not be noticed. For the physical senses are alert, and the individual appears only as though in a fit of abstraction, a Brown study, as some call it. This is another thing that I have a little bit of experience with, right? We have talked often about the fact that I have a fantasia. It is something that it's been, like, I didn't even know it was a thing until a few years ago, but it is definitely part of my life, right? I remember in third grade getting in trouble because I could not visualize. They wanted us to do a visualization exercise where we pictured a box, and I couldn't do it. And my teacher fussed at me. Like, I got in trouble because I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And she's like, yes, you can do it. And I couldn't. I literally could not envision anything. And I was just being honest. So I thought everybody else couldn't either, and they were just lying, right? Lying was an integral part of my growing up. If you were unaware of the origin story, it is well available, but there's a lot of reasons why people lied to me and why I lied to other people. So I just thought everybody was lying about that. But apparently I am different for that. It may be the reason why I can do the things that I do as much as any of the other variables that I do not know about. But I am healing myself from it. All of that is to say that I do meditation, and part of the meditation that I do, I can remove myself from my body. I can project myself out into places energetically. The things that I see are not something that I create. But when it happens, when I have been both pulled from my body involuntarily, that has happened, or when I leave voluntarily, which also has happened, I am still fully aware of my body. Right? People tell you that you will become unaware. As far as I'm concerned, that if you are unaware of your body in its state, then you're probably doing it wrong. Now, I could be wrong. There could be a step that I am missing where I am supposed to lose the awareness of my body when I am out astrally projecting. But for me, personally, I am fully aware of myself. I am aware of the noises around me, and yet I am not even here energetically. I cannot fool myself into thinking that I am having an experience outside of myself because I cannot imagine it. I cannot just close my eyes and say, you know what, I want to be in the park and be in the park. That just does not happen. I cannot remember anybody's face from the entirety of my life. I can close my eyes and remember my wife's face who just left the house 30 minutes ago. Right? I can't do that. I can't close my eyes and see this screen in front of me and this microphone. I cannot do that. I can nowadays change colors. That is the first time in the last few months that I've been able to do anything, and it is something that I am practicing with. But when I do my meditative practices, I am fully aware of my body. So again, that makes me more of an adept than it does anything else. But I wanted to reinforce that because some people say that you will lose your consciousness of your body, and that may be true for some people and not for others. But for me, every single time that I have had any type of this spiritual experience where I have been outside of this body, and that has happened more than once, I've been aware of the body. Right? Maybe that's different in me than other people, but I doubt it. Right? I say all of the time, anything I can do, you can do better. Back to the text. We're going to get a lot out of this one today. To the movements of the wandering astral form, neither time nor space offer obstacles. The thaumaturgist, thoroughly skilled in occult science, can cause himself, that is, his physical body, to seem to disappear or to apparently take on any shape that he may choose. That I don't know about. He may make his astral form visible, or he may give it a protean appearance. Again, something I have not played with. In both cases, these results will be achieved by a mesmeric hallucination of the senses of all witnesses, simultaneously brought on. The hallucination is so perfect that the subject of it would stake his life, that he saw a reality, when it is but a picture of his own mind impressed upon his consciousness by the irresistible will of the mesmerizer. But while the astral form can go anywhere, penetrate any obstacle, and be seen at any distance from the physical body, the latter is dependent upon ordinary methods of transportation. It may be levitated under prescribed magnetic conditions, but not pass from one locality to another in the usual way. Hence, we discredit all stories of the aerial flights of mediums in body, for such would be miracle, and miracle we repudiate. Inert matter may be, in certain cases and under certain conditions, disintegrated, passed through walls, and recombined, but living organisms cannot. Swedenborgians believe, and arcane science teaches, that the embodied abandonment of the living body by the soul frequently occurs, and that we encounter every day in every condition of life such living corpses. Various causes, among them overpowering fright, grief, despair, a violent attack of sickness, or excessive sensuality, may bring this about. The violent carcass may be entered and inhabited by the astral form of an adept sorcerer or an elementary, an earthbound, disembodied human soul, or, very rarely, an elemental. Of course, an adept of the white magic has the same power, but unless some very exceptional and great object is to be accomplished, he will never consent to pollute himself by occupying the body of an impure person. In insanity, the patient's astral being is either semi-paralyzed, bewildered, and subject to the influence of every passing spirit of any sort, or it is departed forever, and the body is taken possession of by some vampirish entity near its own disintegration, and clinging desperately to earth, where sensual pleasures it may enjoy for a brief season longer than this expedient. 10th, the cornerstone of magic is an innate practical knowledge of magnetism and electricity, their qualities, correlations, and potencies. Especially necessary is a familiarity with their effects in and upon the animal kingdom and man. There are occult properties in many other minerals, especially strange with that in the lodestone, which all practitioners of magic must know. and of which so-called exact science is wholly ignorant. Plants also have like mystical properties in a most wonderful degree, and the secrets of the herbs of dreams and enchantments are only lost to European science, and, useless to say too, are unknown to it, except in a few marked instances such as opium and hashish. Yet the psychical effects of even these few upon the human system are regarded as evidences of a temporary mental disorder. The women of Thessaly and Epirus, the female hierophants of the rites of Sabazius, did not carry their secrets away with the downfall of their sanctuaries. They are still preserved, and those who are aware of the nature of soma know the properties of other plants as well. To sum up all in a few words, magic is spiritual wisdom. Nature, the material ally, pupil, and servant of the magician. One common principle pervades all things, and this is controllable by a perfected human will. The adept can stimulate the movements of the natural forces in plants and animals in a preternatural degree. Such experiments are not obstructions of nature, but quickenings. The conditions of intenser vital action are given. This is something that I am playing with. I grow plants. I like to garden. And as a result of things that I have learned in here, I am practicing some magic with plants that seems to be working. Now, I have plans to get into alchemy, right? That is one of the things that I am hoping to enable this year. And part of that is going to be growing my own plants, right? We're going to do rosemary and thyme and all of the various medicinal plants to start with, and start trying to refine and do those things. But part of that is going to be the planting of them and the care and the nurturing of them. And part of that is going to be me doing an experiment. We're going to be trying with some plants to use magic to influence the growth, and with other plants we're not. Exact same growing conditions side by side. We're going to see if anything happens. That is part of what I am going to be doing on this channel this year. So we will see if this indeed bears any weight. Right? That is not to say that if I fail that it can't happen. It's maybe I just don't know something. But I do believe that I have enough of an understanding of how this actually works to make it happen. And I'm not anticipating being able to grow a plant in 24 hours or in an hour or anything of that nature. If that happens, that is going to be a revelation for the entirety of the world. But I do hope to at least be able to give a little bit more vitality to the plants, imbue a little bit more resinous properties and things of that nature. And we're going to see, right? It could be a complete failure. It could be abjectly incomplete, right? We will find out, and you will see either way. Back to the text. Told y'all this is going to be a good one today. This is her wrap-up, right? This is the last chapter, and it's probably going to be at least 2 parts. It may wind up being 3 if I keep talking so much. Back to the text. The adept can control the sensations and alter the conditions of the physical and astral bodies of the other persons not adepts. He can also govern and employ, as he chooses, the spirits of the elements. He cannot control the immortal spirit of any human being, living or dead, for all such spirits are alike sparks of the divine essence, and not subject to any foreign domination. That is another thing. You have to give permission. Now, I want to be very clear about this. When I do my meditative practices and I do my astral projection practices, I set wards. I set shields. I set wards. I make sure that I am not subject to possession. When you are doing out-of-body experiences, you are taking this outside of that. It opens it up, right? Now, I believe in entities. I believe that there are disincorporated bodies, or spirits, but they are exceedingly rare for humans, right? You have to have some reason to be hanging around in order to be hanging around. But it is my estimation that there are at least inimical and beneficial entities, right? That is the angels and demons of popular vernacular. And that there is another realm between us and that particular realm that is populated by the elemental forces. These are the forces of change in primal ways, right? That is the salamanders and things like that that are ethereal, not corporeal, but on a different plane of existence than us, and that they may be able to take possession, right? I do not leave myself open to possession, and neither should you. If you are going to attempt out-of-body things, learn about shields before you do so. Again, the Infinite Integrations playlist. The adept can control the sensations and alter the conditions of the physical and astral bodies of persons not adepts. He can also govern and employ, as he chooses, the spirits of the elements. He cannot control the immortal... Oh, wait, we did that already. Yeah. And this part right here, right? You can control the sensations and alter the conditions of the physical and astral bodies of other persons, not adepts. This is, again, something that is possible, but that you should use the utmost care when doing. Consensual agreements should be made explicitly before any type of this thing goes on. If you see somebody who is not in a condition to consent, it is still possible to give healing, right? They're bleeding, they're unconscious, and you want to lend them some energy. You can do that with the proper intentionality. I would not go past lending energy without consent. It is extremely important. There are two kinds of seership, that of the soul and that of the spirit. The seership of the ancient Pythoness, or of the modern mesmerized subject, vary but in the artificial modes adopted to induce the state of clairvoyance. But as the visions of both depend upon the greater or less acuteness of the senses of the astral body, they differ very widely from the perfect, omniscient spiritual state. For, at best, the subject can get but glimpses of truth through the veil which physical nature interposes. The astral principle, or mind, called by the Hindu yogin Fatma, is the sentient soul, inseparable from our physical brain, which it holds in subjection, and is, in its turn, equally trammeled by it. This is the ego, the intellectual life principle of man, his conscious entity. While it is yet within the material body, the clearness and correctness of its spiritual visions depend on its more or less intimate relation with its higher principle. When this relation is such as to allow the most ethereal portions of the soul essence to act independently of its grosser particles and of the brain, it can unerringly comprehend what it sees. Then only is it the pure, rational, super-sentient soul. That state is known in India as the samadhi. It is the highest condition of spirituality possible to man on earth. Fakirs try to obtain such a condition by holding their breath for hours, together with their religious exercises, and call this practice dham sadhana. The Hindu terms pranayama, pratyahara, and dharana all relate to different psychological states and show how much more than the Sanskrit and even the modern Hindu language are adapted to the clear elucidation of the phenomena that are encountered by those who study this branch of psychological science than the tongues of modern peoples, whose experiences have not yet necessitated the invention of such descriptive terms. Now, I am not aware of the technical definitions of these, right? There are altered states that I enter into that may fall into this, but we have not yet done the Vedas. That is, again, on the list for this year. And so we will find out more as we go along through those. But you can definitely induce a different psychological state in yourself through meditative practices. I do that all the time. When the body is in the state of dharana, a total catalepsy of the physical frame, the soul of the clairvoyant may liberate itself and perceive things subjectively. And yet, as the sentient principle of the brain is alive and active, these pictures of the past, present, and future will be tinctured with the terrestrial perceptions of the objective world. The physical memory and fancy will be in the way of clear vision, but the seer adept knows how to suspend the mechanical action of the brain. His visions will be as clear as truth itself, uncolored and undistorted, whereas the clairvoyant, unable to control the vibrations of the astral waves, will perceive but more or less broken images through the medium of the brain. The seer can never take flickering shadows for realities, and for his memory being as completely subjected to his will as the rest of the body, he receives impressions directly from his spirit. Between his subjective and objective selves there are no obstructive mediums. This is the real spiritual seership in which, according to the expression of Plato, soul is raised above all inferior good, when we reach that which is supreme, which is simple, pure, and unchangeable, without form, color, or human qualities, the God, our nous. Right now, again, this is something that I don't struggle with as much as other people, because I cannot imagine for myself. I cannot say that I want to see something and make it happen. If I am seeing something and it is clear, it is obvious that it is coming from outside of me to me. And so I don't struggle with that in ways that other people do. This is the state which such seers as Plotinus and Apollonius term the union to the deity, which I also agree with. That I call it the oneness, right? I call it being in the oneness, walking in the oneness. These days I'm running in the oneness. It is a meditative state of being connected with the all and the everything. So yeah, union to the deity, which the ancient yogins called isvara and the modern called samadhi. But this state is far above modern clairvoyance as the stars above glowworms. Plotinus, as is well known, was a clairvoyant seer during his whole and daily life, and yet he had been united to his God but 6 times during the 66 years of his existence, as he confessed with Porphyry. That's a little while to me. You have not... I want to be very clear with this. I do this daily. Like literally every day. Every single morning when I begin, like I do my walk, I say my prayer, and then I enter into the meditative state. It is literally something that I do every single day. So, I don't understand only 6 times during 66 years, right? Maybe that is a different experience than the one I am having, but I am definitely having an experience. So, Ammonius Saccas. And that may have a lot to do, right? I hold unconventional beliefs. If you're unfamiliar, I have several playlists where I talk about my unconventional beliefs. And part of that is that life is about a balance, not the exclusion, right? We talk about that quite often, how there are 7 virtues and there are 7 vices, and you are meant to find the balance between those, right? Between lust and chastity, between greed and charity. You are not meant to be greedy and to place value on material things above and beyond live things, or to hold on to possessions with no need or use for them, to accumulate wealth to an excessive degree. You're not meant to do those things. Neither are you meant to be poor. You're not meant to be destitute. You are not meant to wonder where your next meal is coming from. You are meant to find the balance between those two, to work diligently here for the lessons that come from working. You are meant to strive and to struggle and to grow and to become more and more. And so the limitation that he has found may be because, as many of the people who practice this do, it is a life of exception. And by that I mean, I'm not going to eat meat. That is not doing it correctly. I'm going to give away all of my goods and live for the poor. That is not doing it correctly. I'm never going to have sex. That is not doing it correctly, right? If you are living for nothing but the virtues, you are not doing it correctly. It is entirely possible that the limitation of 6 times in 66 years is because he was living a life of exclusion. Many people place a value upon that. I understand that. It doesn't make you correct. I don't care how long the practice has been. What I do works. It is because I have found the balance in my life. That is a direct revelation to me that I was supposed to share with my crew, and I did. I point it out as often as I possibly can, because you are not meant to live a life of virtue or vice, but in the middle, right? Everybody makes mistakes. Don't live in the mistakes. Don't revel in the vices. Everybody has exceedingly great moments, but that is not meant to be your life. You are not meant to be chaste. You are not meant to be destitute. You are not meant to be entirely humble. That is not what your divine purpose on this planet is. Your divine purpose, just like everybody else's, is to learn the lessons and find the balance. Back to the text. This is a good one today. I'm really enjoying this. Ammonius Saccas, the God taught, asserts that the only power which directly opposed to soothsaying and looking into futurity is memory, as Olympodorus calls it, fantasy. The fantasy, he says in Plotinus Phaed, is an impediment to our intellectual conceptions, and hence, when we are agitated by the inspiring influence of the divinity, the fantasy intervenes. The enthusiastic energy ceases, for enthusiasm and the ecstasy are contrary to each other. That is not true. Should it be asked whether the soul is able to energize without the fantasy, we reply that its perception of universals proves that it is able. It has perceptions, therefore, independent of the fantasy. At the same time, however, the fantasy attends it in its energies, just as a storm pursues him who sails on the sea. All right. The only power which is directly opposed to soothsaying and looking into futurity is memory, and Olympodorus calls it fantasy. Now, I don't necessarily know about that. What I do know is there are severe problems with attempting to look into the future. The main reason for that is that the future is entirely up to you, right? It is up to me where my future goes. It is up to you where your future goes. We are each on a individual timeline. If you are unaware of what I mean by that, the NPC video will get you there. The NPC in the multiverse. We are each on a timeline. And we are not all on the same timeline, although we often share the same goals, the same events. Those are bottlenecks sometimes, right? Like World War II was a bottleneck. The Civil War was a bottleneck. It is something that humanity had to go through for the experience, but the reaction to it is up to the individual. It can go in any direction. Looking into the future is looking at your perception of what the future will be. And it can be true, but it probably won't be. In addition to that, you can only interpret prophecy according to the things which you already know. What that means is, as I often point out, if I took Isaiah from the Bible and I set him right next to me right now, just pulled him wholesale from 7,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago or whatever it is, and set him right here next to me, he would have no way of describing what he has with accuracy, what he sees with accuracy, right? He wouldn't understand this television. He wouldn't understand this microphone or this camera. He wouldn't understand my glasses. He wouldn't understand this glass that I drink my tea out of. He wouldn't, but he would have a concept, right? He would be like, well, it's a cup, but you could see through it. That's a little bit wild. Maybe he would have a descriptor for that. It would be a glowing rock where I got information, right? I can make this rock talk to me. That would be his conception of it. That's how he would describe it. So you can only describe prophecy according to what you see. Now, or what you already know. Now, if he was here for a year, I could train him to do this. I could train him, provided we could overcome the language barrier. I could train him to make these videos. I can train him to do the recording process, the editing process, and he could understand that. And then he would be able to describe it in a manner that would be effective for other people. Most of the problem with prophecy is you're projecting out, you're trying to see way out into the future, right? Depending on how far, like Isaiah was seeing the end days, right? There's a lot happens between Isaiah and the end days. He had no idea about electricity. He has no way to describe electricity. He didn't say anything that even came close to saying that it would be a thing. You can interpret prophecy, but it is only by the knowledge that you already have. That is the problem with looking into the future, right? To seeing what is coming. You can take control of your timeline. You can see a little bit farther ahead, but I would not go too far, right? You can look ahead for a year. I don't, right? I don't play with that at all, because you get into loops and contradictions and all kinds of things. If you know that something's going to happen, you would make a predetermination about that thing, and that may not be the thing that should have happened for the best outcome. Your pre-knowledge of that thing shapes the way that you react to it, and it causes you to have a different reaction than the one that you would have naturally. The one that you have naturally is the one that is for your betterment. You should not really be practicing prognostication. There are times for it, right? The bottlenecks are coming. I believe fully and firmly that in the next 40 years, we're probably going to see one of those. If that is confusing to you, the 12,000-year disaster cycle will get you there. All right, that should do it for prophecy. A medium, moreover, needs either a foreign intelligence, whether it be a spirit or living mesmerizer, to overpower his physical and mental parts, or some factitious means to induce trance. What do we talk about all the time? Them doors, right? There are doors in your mind. If you were unaware, you have a pineal gland, and that gland secretes a substance that can allow you to alter your perception of things. You, through practice, prayer, fasting, and meditation, and understanding how to manipulate the energy, can milk that. You can make it produce that chemical. It is dimethyltryptamine, which is DMT. It is the thing that is naturally occurring when you die. It is naturally occurring when you were born, but it doesn't really happen a whole lot between then, except sometimes at night when you were sleeping. It has a lot to do with dream state and things like that, but not even fully, right? Most people don't do that even when they are sleeping. Now, there is a conspiracy theory that you can drink water and it's going to keep your pineal gland from being activated, and that is false. There is no substance that you can drink or take that can, without your will, affect your God-given innate talents, right? Now, you can drink poison and it can stop your heart, right? That is not what I'm talking about. The government cannot put stuff into your water that is going to calcify your pineal gland and prevent you from using your power, right? You, however, can believe that that is a real thing and prevent yourself from penetrating that veil. There is a natural calcification process that happens, but it's because you are not exercising the muscle. It's literally like just holding the same muscle tone for the entirety of your life, like making your biceps bulge or your forearms bulge or whatever, and just holding that forever. Eventually, it's going to get stuck, right? Eventually, incrustation is going to happen. That's the fossilization process. That is a natural thing that happens, but the energetic manipulation that we talked about earlier allowed me to break that calcification. I can flex my pineal gland. It is literally the third eye chakra, and you can flex all 8 of the chakras. The flexing of the chakra breaks the calcification. There is no need for an external element to be introduced. You don't have to drink some potion or eat some special food or purify water or anything of that nature. Nothing can separate you from your pineal gland except your willingness to actually do the work that is required to learn to flex the muscle. The more you flex the muscle, the easier it is to get. I can flex all of my chakras pretty seamlessly these days. I can move the energy where it needs to be. I don't try to push boundaries, right? I move the energy where it needs to be. The healing that is in my throat, the fact that I can talk to you like this, even though it's not sustained yet. The reason that works is just because I take the energy and I set it in my throat. And then I'll let the energy do what it needs to do in its own time. It was not healing at all prior to me doing these exercises. Prior to me moving the energy, it was a point of stasis. I could talk way up here where I do the quotes now, I could do that, but I couldn't talk here, like at all. A year ago, well, just over a year ago, I couldn't talk here in this tone of voice at all. Over the course of this past year, I have built up vocal strength and I can talk a little bit more, but I am still resting the energy there. I am allowing it to do what it needs to do. And every single day there is progression, but I do not push it too far. All right, let's get back to the text before I get too far off. But I wanted to point out that the foreign interference that's only effective if you allow it to be. There is nothing that can separate you from your ability to do the energy work if you don't allow it to. Back to the text. An adept, and even a simple fakir, requires but a few minutes of self-contemplation. That's all it takes for me. The brazen columns of Solomon's temple, the golden bells and pomegranates of Aaron, the Jupiter Capitolonius of Augustus, hung around with harmonious bells, and the brazen bowls of the mysteries when the Korah was called, were all intended for such artificial helps. So were the brazen bowls of Solomon, hung round with a double row of 200 pomegranates, which served as clappers within the hollow columns. The priestesses of northern Germany, under the guidance of the Hierophants, could never prophesy but amidst the roar of the tumultuous waters. Regarding fixedly the eddies formed on the rapid course of the river, they hypnotized themselves. So, we read of Joseph, Jacob's son, who sought for divine inspiration with his silver divining cup, which must have had a very bright bottom to it. The priestesses of Dodona placed themselves under the ancient oak of Zeus, the Pelasgian, not the Olympian god, and listened intently to the rustling of the sacred leaves, while others concentrated their attention on the soft murmur of the cold spring gushing from underneath its roots. But the adept has no need of any such extraneous aids. The simple exertion of his willpower is all self-sufficient. The Atharvaveda teaches that the exercise of such willpower is the highest form of prayer and its instantaneous response. To desire is to realize in proportion to the intensity of the aspiration, and that, in its turn, is measured by inward purity. Not necessarily. Like that inward purity is another one of those sticking points that goes back to what we just talked about with the virtues and vices, right? There is a misconception about that. It is not true, right? You do need to walk in relative purity, right? You need to have best intentions. You need to have the ability to do things to the best of your ability, to set your intentionality correctly. That is true, 100%. But that does not mean that you have to be chaste and not engage in sexual congress. It does not mean that you have to lead a vegan lifestyle or fast for 2 weeks or 40 days or whatever it needs to be. You don't have to do those things in order to get what you need, right? There is a purity requirement, see the 8 laws of creation, but it is not what most of these writers mean when they say it. Some of these nobler Vedantic precepts on the soul and man's mystic powers have recently been contributed to an English periodical by a Hindu scholar. The Sankhya, he writes, indicates that the soul, in example the astral body, has the following powers: shrinking to a minute bulk to which everything is pervious, enlarging to a gigantic body, assuming levity, rising along a sunbeam to the solar orb, possessing an unlimited reach of organs, as touching the moon with the tip of a finger, irresistible will, for instance, sinking into the earth as easily in the water, dominion over all things, animate or inanimate, faculty of changing the course of nature, ability to accomplish every desire. Now, I'm going to go out and say that I have absolutely no experience with any of that. All of the things that are said here, I don't like. Shrinking to a minute bulk. Yeah, you can mentally think that, but as far as I am aware, you cannot physically affect your body in that way. The same with reaching a massive bulk or gigantic body. Assuming levity, rising along a sunbeam. Again, you may be able to do that through visualization practices, but as far as I am aware, nobody can fly. Right? That's not to say that it's impossible. It is something I don't have experience with. Possessing an unlimited reach of organs, as touching the moon with the tip of a finger, is, again, as far as I am aware, beyond the capability of mankind. You can visualize it. That does not make it real. Irresistible will, that one's a little bit more iffy because you can affect things both within yourself and other people. It is not something that I recommend, again, without consent. Dominion over all things, that's kind of true. You have a lot of leeway in what you do with your timeline. There are rules. You will have repercussions if you take the inappropriate actions, but you do have a large degree of control even over the lesser realms. So most of this I disagree with because I have no experience with it. That doesn't mean that it is necessarily untrue, but it is a little bit incredulous to me. The powers are called 1. Anima, 2. Mahima, 3. Laghima, 4. Garima, 5. Prapati, 6. Prakamya, 7. Vasatwa, 8. Isatwa, or divine power. Now, I don't know what these words mean, and we may be about to get that, but it is interesting to note that there are 8 of them, ending with the divine. The 5th, predicting future events, understanding unknown languages, curing diseases, divining unexpressed thoughts, understanding the language of the heart. The 6th is the power of converting old age into youth. No. The 7th is the power of mesmerizing human beings and beasts and making them obedient. That would have to be attached to the crown, right? Like the chakras. Base, that controls mere existence, needing to survive. The sacral, which is one step up, that has to do with what you want and sexual generation and reproduction and creative efforts. The solar plexus, that has to do with nourishment, fulfillment, and desires. The 4th is the heart. That is where the union between the above and the below happens. That is the part that keeps you together. It is the part that pushes the blood out into your body, but it is also where your true desires lie. The 5th is your throat. That is where you express desires. That is where you amplify the efforts of the energetic investments. The 3rd eye is the 6th. That is where you envision and set the direction of the energetic efforts. The 7th would be the crown, which is where you receive your divine inspiration. And the 8th is the encompassing divine aura, and that is where you actually perform the manifestation if you have the other 7 in line. And so, what I am seeing here is not right. The 5th is not going to be about predicting the future events. That would be the 6th. The understanding unknown languages and curing diseases. Now, the languages, maybe. Curing diseases, absolutely not. Divining unexpressed thoughts? No, that would be more on the 3rd eye. Understanding the language of the heart. That would literally be the 4th. The 6th is the power of converting old age into youth. That is not even a thing. The 7th is the power of mesmerizing human beings and beasts and making them obedient. Yes, but again, with the caveat that intentionality makes a massive difference in that. If you are unaware, if you have not attained the level of understanding that is necessary to practice the things that we are talking about, again, fall back to the Infinite Integrations playlist, please. The 8th power is the spiritual state and presupposes the absence of the above 7 powers, as in this state the yogi is full God. Now, what did I just tell you? The 8th is the divine aura. You have access to it. You have a measure of control of it, but most of that is literally the Holy Spirit. You are investing your energy into that particular aura, that particular chakra, and that is going to be what makes it happen. It is literally the interaction with the divine. So that does make a little bit of sense. It does not presuppose the absence of the above 7 powers. However, what it is control, maintaining the balance therein. Back to the text. No writings, he adds, revealed or sacred, or allowed to be so authoritative and final as the teachings of the soul. Some of the rishis appear to have laid the greatest stress on this supersensuous source of knowledge. From the remotest antiquity, mankind as a whole have always been convinced of the existence of a personal spiritual entity within the personal physical man. That would be the soul. This inner entity was more or less divine. It is a sliver of the divine, but it is not divine in and of itself, according to its proximity to the crown. That is where you receive your divine inspiration, Christos. The closer the union, the more serene man's destiny, the less dangerous the external conditions. This belief is neither bigotry nor superstition, only an ever-present instinctive feeling of the proximity of another spiritual and invisible world, which, though it be subjective to the senses of the outward man, is perfectly objective to the inner ego. Furthermore, they believe that there are external and internal conditions which affect the determination of our will upon our actions. They rejected fatalism, for fatalism implies a blind course of some still blinder power. But they believed in destiny, from which, from birth to death, every man is weaving thread by thread around himself, as a spider does its cobweb. And this destiny is guided either by that presence, termed by some the guardian angel, or our more intimate astral inner man, who is but too often the evil genius of the man of flesh. Both these lead to the outward man, but one of them must prevail, and from the very beginning of the invisible affray, the stern and implacable law of compensation, the law of returns, steps in and takes its course, following faithfully the fluctuations. When the last strand is woven and man is seemingly enwrapped in the network of his own doing, then he finds himself completely under the empire of this self-made destiny. Whoops, I just spilled some tea. It is that it then either fixes him like the inert shell against the immovable rock, or, like a feather, carries him away in a whirlwind raised by his own actions. The greatest philosophers of antiquity found it neither unreasonable nor strange that souls should come to souls and impart to them conceptions of future things, occasionally by letters, or by a mere touch, or by a glance reveal to them the past events and announce future ones, as Ammonius tells us. Moreover, Lamprius and others held that if the unembodied spirits or souls could descend on earth and become guardians of mortal men, we should not seek to deprive those souls which are still in the body of that power by which the former know future events and are able to announce them. It is not probable, as Lamprius, that the soul gains a new power of prophecy after separation from the body, and which before it did not possess. We may rather conclude that it possessed all these powers during its union with the body, although in a lesser perfection. For as the sun does not shine only when it passes from among the clouds, but has always been radiant, and has only appeared dim and obscured by vapors, the soul does not only receive the power of looking into futurity when it passes from the body as from a cloud, but has possessed it always, though dimmed by connection with the earthly. That is mostly correct. We've already talked about the differentiations between mostly and entirely, so. A familiar example of one phase of the power of the soul or astral body to manifest itself is the phenomena of the so-called spirit hand. In the presence of certain mediums, these seemingly detached members will gradually develop from a luminous nebula, pick up a pencil, write messages, and then dissolve before the eyes of the witnesses. Many such cases are recorded by perfectly competent and trustworthy persons. These phenomena are real and require serious consideration, but false, phantom hands have sometimes been taken for the genuine. At Dresden, we once saw a hand and an arm, made for the purpose of deception, with an ingenious arrangement of springs that would cause the machine to imitate to perfection the movements of the natural member, while exteriorly it would require close inspection to detect its artificial character. In using this, the dishonest medium slips his natural arm out of his sleeve and replaces it with the mechanical substitute. Both hands may then be made to seem resting upon the table, while in fact one is touching the sitters, showing itself, knocking the furniture, and making other phenomena. The mediums for real manifestations are least able, as a rule, to comprehend or explain them. Among those who have written most intelligently upon the subject of these luminous hands may be reckoned Dr. Francis Jerry Fairfield, author of 10 Years Among the Mediums, an article from whose pen appears in the library table for July 19, 1877. A medium himself, he is yet a strong opponent of the spiritualistic theory. Discussing the subject of the phantom hand, he testifies that this the writer has personally witnessed under conditions of test provided by himself in his own room in full daylight, with the medium seated upon a sofa from 6 to 8 feet from the table, hovering upon which the apparition, the hand, appeared. The application of the poles of a horseshoe magnet to the hand caused it to wave perceptibly, and threw the medium into violent convulsions. Pretty positive evidence that the force concerned in the phenomenon was generated in his own nervous system. That would be the electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the Holy Spirit. If it's affected by a magnet, I wonder if it might be magnetic. Dr. Fairfield's deduction that the fluttering phantom hand is an emanation from the medium is logical and is correct. The test of a horseshoe magnet proves in a scientific way what every Kabbalist would affirm upon the authority of experience, no less than philosophy. The force concerned in the phenomenon is the will of the medium, exercised unconsciously to the outer man, which for the time is semi-paralyzed and cataleptic. The phantom hand is an extrusion of the man's inner or astral member. This is that real self whose limbs the surgeon cannot amputate, but remain behind after the outer casing is cut off, and, all theories of exposed or compressed nerve termini to the contrary notwithstanding, have all the sensations of physical parts formerly experienced. That is phantom limb syndrome, and that is a very real thing. This is that spiritual, astral body which is raised in incorruption. It is useless to argue that these are spirit hands, for admitting that at every seance, human spirits of many kinds are attracted to the medium, and that they do guide and produce some manifestations. Yet to make hands or faces objective, they are compelled to use either the astral limbs of the medium, or the materials furnished them by the elementals, or yet the combined oral emanations of all persons present. Pure spirits will not and cannot show themselves objectively. Those that do are not pure spirits, but elementary and impure. Woe to the medium who falls prey to such. The same principle involved in the unconscious extrusion of a phantom limb by the cataleptic medium applies to the projection of his entire double, or astral body. This may be withdrawn by the will of the medium's own inner self, without his retaining in his physical brain any recollection of such an intent. That is one phase of man's dual capacity. It may also be affected by elementary and elemental spirits, to whom he may stand in the relation of mesmeric subject. Dr. Fairfield is right in one position taken in his book, vis-a-vis, mediums are usually diseased, and in many, if not most cases, the children or near corrections of mediums. But he is wholly wrong in attributing all psychical phenomena to morbid physiological conditions. The adepts of Eastern magic are uniformly in perfect mental and bodily health, and, in fact, the voluntary and independent production of phenomena is impossible to any others. We have known many, and never a sick man among them. The adept retains perfect consciousness, shows no change of bodily temperature, or other signs of morbidity, requires no conditions, but will do his feats anywhere and everywhere, and instead of being passive and in subjection to a foreign influence, rules the forces with iron will. But we have elsewhere shown that the medium and the adept are as opposed as the poles. We will only add here that the body, soul, and spirit of the adept are all conscious and working in harmony, and the body of the medium is an inert clod, and even his soul may be away in a dream, while its habitation is occupied by another. An adept can not only project and make visible a hand, a foot, and any other portion of his body, but the whole of it. We have seen one do this in full day, while his hand and feet were being held by a skeptical friend whom he wished to surprise. Little by little, the whole astral body oozed out like a vapory cloud, until before us stood two forms, of which the second was an exact duplicate of the first, only slightly more shadowy. I don't have any experience with that. I do not doubt that it is possible, however. The medium need not exercise any willpower. It suffices that he or she shall know what is expected by the investigators. The medium's spiritual entity, when not obsessed by other spirits, will act outside the will or consciousness of the physical being as surely as it acts within the body during a fit of somnambulism. Its perceptions, external and internal, will be acuter and far more developed, precisely as they are in the sleepwalker. And this is why the materialized form sometimes knows more than the medium. For the intellectual perception of the astral entity is proportionally as much higher than the corporeal intelligence of the medium in its normal state, as the spirit entity is finer than itself. Generally, the medium will be found cold, the pulse will have visibly changed, and a state of nervous prostration succeeds the phenomena, bunglingly and without discrimination attributed to disembodied spirits, whereas but 1/3 of them may be produced by the latter, another third by elementals, and the rest by the astral double of the medium himself. But while it is our firm belief that most of the physical manifestations, in example, those which neither need nor show intelligence nor great discrimination, are produced mechanically by the skinleka double of the medium, as a person in sound sleep will, when apparently awake, do things of which he will retain no remembrance. The purely subjective phenomena are but in a very small proportion of cases due to the action of the personal astral body. They are mostly, and according to the moral, intellectual, and physical purity of the medium, the work of either the elementary, or sometimes very pure human spirits. Elementals have naught to do with these subjective manifestations. In rare cases, it is the divine spirit of the medium himself that guides and produces them. As Babu Piri Chand Mitra says in a letter to the president of the National Association of Spiritualists, Mr. Alexander Calder, a spirit is an essence or power and has no form. The very idea of form implies materialism. The spirits, astral souls we should say, can assume forms for a time, but form is not their permanent state. The more material is our soul, the more material is our conception of spirits. Epimenides, the Orphichos, was renowned for his sacred and marvelous nature, and for the faculty his soul possessed of quitting its body, as long and as often as it pleased. The ancient philosophers who have testified to this ability may be reckoned by dozens. Apollonius left his body at a moment's notice, but it must be remembered Apollonius was an adept, a magician. Had he been simply a medium, he could not have performed such feats at will. Empedocles of Agrigentum, the Pythagorean thaumaturgus, required no conditions to arrest a waterspout which had broken over the city. Neither did he need any to recall a woman to life, as he did. Apollonius used no darkened room in which to perform his aerobatic feats. That's a nice word, aerobatic. Vanishing suddenly in the air before the eyes of the Damatan and a whole crowd of witnesses, many thousands, he appeared an hour after in the grotto of Puteoli. But investigation would have shown that his physical body, having become invisible by the concentration of Acaxa about it, he could walk off unperceived to some secure retreat in the neighborhood, and an hour after his astral form appeared at Puteoli to his friends, and seemed to be the man himself. No more did Simon Magus wait to be entranced, to fly off in the air before the apostles and crowds of witnesses. It requires no conjuration or ceremonies, circle-making and incensing, or mere nonsense and juggling. That repeats what I said earlier. Says Paracelsus, the human spirit is so great a thing that no man can express it. As God himself is eternal and unchangeable, so also is the mind of man. If we rightly understood its powers, nothing would be impossible to us on earth. That's why we have that amnesia. The imagination is strengthened and developed through faith in our will. Faith must confirm the imagination, for faith establishes the will. A singular account of the personal interview of an English ambassador in 1783 with a reincarnated Buddha, barely mentioned in Volume 1, an infant of 18 months old at the time, is given in the Asiatic Journal from the narrative of an eyewitness himself, Mr. Turner, the author of The Embassy to Tibet. The cautious phraseology of a skeptic dreading public ridicule ill conceals the amazement of witnesses who, at the same time, desires to give facts as truthfully as possible. The infant Lama received the ambassador and his suite with a dignity and decorum so natural and unconstrained that they remained in a perfect maze of wonder. The behavior of this infant, says the author, was that of an old philosopher, grave and sedate and exceedingly courteous. He contrived to make the young pontiff understand the inconsolable grief into which the Governor-General of Calcutta, the city of palaces, and the people of India were plunged when he died, and the general rapture when they found that he had resurrected in a young and fresh body again. At which compliment the young Lama regarded him and his suite with looks of singular complacency, and courteously treated them to confectionery from a golden cup. The ambassador continued to express the Governor-General's hope that the Lama might long continue to illume the world with his presence, and that the friendship which had heretofore subsisted between them might be yet more strongly cemented, for the benefit and advantage of the intelligent votaries of the Lama, all which made the little creature look steadfastly at the speaker and graciously bow and nod, as if he understood and approved of every word that was uttered. As if he understood. If the infant behaved in the most natural and dignified way during the reception, and when their cups were empty of tea, became uneasy, and throwing back his head and contracting the skin of his brow, continued making a noise till they were filled again. Why could he not understand as well what was said to him? So he was nonverbal? Years ago, a small party of travelers were painfully journeying to Kashmir, to Leh, the city of Ladakh, central Tibet. Among our guides we had a Tatar shaman, a very mysterious personage, who spoke Russian, this is not a quote, who spoke Russian a little and English not at all, and yet who managed, nevertheless, to converse with us, and proved of great service. Having learned that some of our party were Russians, he had imagined that our protection was all-powerful and might enable him to safely find his way back to his Siberian home, from which, for reasons unknown, some 20 years before he had fled, as he told us, via Kiachata and the great Gobi Desert, to the land of the Chagars. With such an interested object in view, we believed ourselves safe under his guard. To explain the situation briefly, our companions had formed the unwise plan of penetrating into Tibet under various disguises, none of them speaking the language, although one, a Mr. K, had picked up some Kasan Tartar and thought he did. As we mentioned this only incidentally, we may as well say at once that two of them, the brothers N, were very politely brought back to the frontier before they had walked 16 miles into the weird land of Eastern Bode, and Mr. K, an ex-Lutheran minister, could not even attempt to leave his miserable village near Leh, as from the first days he found himself prostrated with fever, and had to return to Lahore via Kashmir. But one sight seen by him was as good as if he had witnessed the reincarnation of Buddha itself. having heard of this miracle from some old Russian missionary in whom he thought he could have more faith than in Abbe Hooke. It had been for years his desire to expose the great heathen jugglery, as he expressed it. Kay was a positivist, and rather prided himself on his anti-philosophical neologism, but his positivism was doomed to receive a death blow. About 4 days' journey from Islamabad, at an insignificant mud village whose only redeeming feature was its magnificent lake, we stopped for a few days' rest. Our companions had temporarily separated from us, and the village was to be our place of meeting. It was there that we were apprised by our shaman that a large party of Lamech saints, on pilgrimage to various shrines, had taken up their abode in an old cave temple and established a temporary vihara therein. He added that, as the 3 honorable ones were said to travel along with him, the holy bhikshu, monks, were capable of producing the greatest miracles. Mr. K, fired with the prospect of exposing this humbug of the ages, proceeded at once to pay them a visit, and from that moment the most friendly relations were established between the 2 camps. The Vihar was in a secluded and most romantic spot, secured against all intrusion, despite the effusive attentions, presents, and protestations of Mr. K, the chief, who was Passe-Boudou, an ascetic of great sanctity, declined to exhibit the phenomena of the incarnation until a certain talisman in possession of the writer was exhibited. Upon seeing this, however, preparations were at once made, and an infant of 3 or 4 months was procured from its mother, a poor woman of the neighborhood. An oath was first of all exacted of Mr. K that he would not divulge what he might see or hear for the space of 7 years. The talisman is a simple agate or carnelian, known among the Tibetans and others as Ayu, and naturally possessed, or had been endowed with, very mysterious properties. It has a triangle engraved upon it, within which are contained a few mystical words. Several days passed before everything was ready, nothing of a mysterious character occurring, except that, at the bidding of a bhikshu, ghastly faces were made to peep out at us from the glassy bosom of the lake, as we sat at the door of the vihar upon its bank. One of these was the countenance of Mr. K.'s sister, whom he had left well and happy at home, but who, as we subsequently learned, had died some time before he set out on the present journey. The sight affected him at first, but he called his skepticism to his aid and quieted himself with theories of cloud shadows, reflections of tree branches, etc., such as people of his kind fall back upon. On the appointed afternoon, the baby, being brought to the vihara, was left in the vestibule or reception room, as K could go no further into the temporary sanctuary. The child was then placed on a bit of carpet in the middle of the floor, and everyone not belonging to the party sent away. 2 mendicants were placed at the entrance to keep out intruders. Then the lamas seated themselves on the floor with their backs against the granite walls, so that each was separated from the child by a space at least of 10 feet. The chief, having had a square piece of leather spread for him by a desservant, seated himself at the farthest corner. Alone, Mr. K placed himself close by the infant and watched every movement with intense interest. The only condition exacted of us is that we should preserve a strict silence and patiently await further developments. A bright sunlight streamed through the open door. Gradually, the superior fell into what seemed a state of profound meditation, while the others, after a sottovoce, short invocation, became suddenly silent and looked as if they had been completely petrified. It was oppressively still, and the crowing of the child was the only sound to be heard. After we sat there a few moments, the movements of the infant's limbs suddenly ceased, and his body appeared to become rigid. K watched intently every motion, and both of us, by a rapid glance, became satisfied that all present were sitting motionless. The superior, with his gaze fixed upon the ground, did not even look at the infant, but pale and motionless, he seemed rather like a bronze statue of a Talapoin in meditation than a living being. Suddenly, to our great consternation, we saw the child, not raise itself, but, as it were, violently jerked into a sitting posture. A few more jerks, and then, like an automaton set in motion by concealed wires, the 4 months baby stood upon his feet. Fancy our consternation, and, in Mr. K's case, horror. Not a hand had been outstretched, not a motion made, nor a word spoken, and yet here was a baby in arms, standing erect and firm as a man. The rest of the story we will quote from a copy of notes written on the subject by Mr. K. the same evening, and given to us in case it should not reach its place of destination, or the writer failed to see anything more. After a minute or two of hesitation, writes K., the baby turned its head and looked at me with an expression of intelligence that was simply awful. It sent a chill through me. I pinched my hands and bit my lips till the blood almost came, to make sure that I did not dream. They just forced possession of this child. But this was only the beginning. The miraculous creature, making, as I fancied, 2 steps toward me, resumed his sitting posture, and without removing his eyes from mine repeated, sentence by sentence, in what I supposed to be Tibetan language, the very words which I had been told in advance are commonly spoken at the incarnations of Buddha, beginning with, "I am Buddha, I am the old Lama, I am his spirit in a new body," etc. I felt a real terror. My hair rose on my head, my blood ran cold. For my life I could not have spoken a word. There was no trickery here, no ventriloquism. The infant lips moved, and the eyes seemed to search my very soul, with an expression that made me think it was the face of the superior himself. His eyes, his very look that I was gazing upon. It was as if his spirit had entered the little body and was looking at me through the transparent mask of the baby's face. I felt my brain growing dizzy. The infant reached toward me and laid his little hand upon mine. I started as if I had been touched by a hot coal, and unable to bear the scene any longer, covered my face with my hands. It was but for an instant, and when I removed them, the little actor had become a crowing baby again, and a moment after, laying upon his back, set up a fretful cry. The superior had resumed his normal condition, and conversation ensued. It was only after a series of similar experiments extending over 10 days that I realized the fact that I had seen the incredible, astounding phenomenon described by certain travelers, but always by me denounced as an imposture. Among the multitude of questions unanswered, despite my cross-examination, the superior let drop one piece of information which must be regarded as highly significant. What would have happened, I inquired, through the shaman, if, while the infant was speaking in a moment of insane fright at the thought of its being the devil, I had killed it? He replied that if the blow had not been instantly fatal, the child alone would have been killed. But, I suppose that it had been as swift as a lightning flash. In such case, was the answer, you would have killed me also. In Japan and Siam, there are 2 orders of priests, of which one are public and deal with the people, the others strictly private. The latter are never seen. Their existence is known but to very few natives, never to foreigners. Their powers are never displayed in public, nor ever at all, except on rare occasion of utmost importance, at which times the ceremonies are performed in subterranean or otherwise inaccessible temples, and in the presence of a chosen few whose heads answer for their secrecy. Among such occasions are deaths in the royal family or those of high dignitaries affiliated with the order. One of the most weird and impressive exhibitions of the power of these magicians is that of the withdrawal of the astral soul from the cremated remains of human beings, a ceremony practiced likewise in some of the most important lamaseries of Tibet and Mongolia. In Siam, Japan, and Great Tartary, it is the custom to make medallions, statuettes, and idols out of the ashes of cremated persons, They are mixed with water into a paste, and after being molded into the desired shape are baked and then gilded. The lamasery of Ute in the province of Changxi, Mongolia, is the most famous for that work, and rich persons send the bones of their defunct relatives to be ground and fashioned there. I am not wearing bones. When the adept in magic proposes to facilitate the withdrawal of the astral soul of the deceased, which otherwise they think might remain stupefied for an indefinite period within the ashes, the following process is resorted to. The sacred dust is placed in a heap upon a metallic plate strongly magnetized, of the size of a man's body. The adept then slowly and gently fans it with the talapatnang, a fan of a peculiar shape and inscribed with certain signs, muttering at the same time a form of invocation. The ashes soon become, as it were, imbued with life and gently spread themselves out in a thin layer which assumes the outline of the body before cremation. Then there gradually arises a sort of whitish vapor, which after a time forms into an erect column, and compacting itself is finally transformed into the double, or ethereal, astral counterpart of the dead, which in its turn dissolves away into thin air and disappears from mortal sight. The magicians of Kashmir, Tibet, Mongolia, and Great Tartary are too well known to need comments. If jugglers they be, we invite the most expert jugglers of Europe and America to match them if they can. If our scientists are unable to imitate the mummy embalming of the Egyptians, how much greater would be their surprise to see, as we have, dead bodies preserved by alchemical art, so that after the lapse of centuries they seem as though the individuals were but sleeping. The complexions were as fresh, the skin as elastic, the eyes as natural and sparkling, as though they were in the full flush of health, and the wheels of life had been stopped but the instant before. The bodies of certain very eminent personages are laid upon catafalques in rich mausoleums, sometimes overlaid with gilding or even with plates of real gold. Their favorite arms, trinkets, and articles of daily use gathered about them, and a suite of attendants, blooming young boys and girls, but still corpses, preserved like their masters, stand as if ready to serve when called. That is evil. If you are killing children because somebody died, that is evil, and anybody associated with that is inherently evil. They are practicing evil magic, and you should not associate with anyone who does anything remotely similar to that. In the convent of the Great Koran, and in one of the situated upon the holy mountain, Boteoula, there are said to be several such sepulchres, which have been respected by all the conquering hordes that have swept through those countries. Abbe Hooke heard that such exist, but did not see one. Strangers of all kinds being excluded, and missionaries and European travelers not furnished with the requisite protection, being the last of all persons who would be permitted to approach the sacred places. Hooke's statement that the tombs of Tartar sovereigns are surrounded with children who were compelled to swallow mercury until they suffocated, by which means the color and freshness of the victims is preserved so well they appear alive, is one of these idle missionary fables which impose only upon the most ignorant who accept on hearsay. Buddhists have never immolated victims, whether human or animal. It is utterly against the principles of their religion, and no Lamist was ever accused of it. There have been a couple that set themselves on fire, however. When a rich man desired to be interred in company, messengers were sent throughout the country with the Lama embalmers, and children just dead in the natural way were selected for the purpose. That is a little bit better. Poor parents were but too glad to preserve their departed children in this poetic way, instead of abandoning them to decay in wild beasts. I say a little bit better because you are still taking the intention of the wrong thing, right? You are attempting to preserve something that should be decaying naturally, that is part of the natural process and should happen. You are much more likely to leave a soul attached to the body in this particular situation. And so, again, despite the fact that they did not kill anybody, if they are doing this, it's probably the wrong energy. At the time when Abbe Houck was living in Paris, after his return from Tibet, he related, among other unpublished wonders, to a Mr. Arseniev, a Russian gentleman, the following curious fact that he had witnessed during his long sojourn at the lamasery of Konbun. One day, while conversing with one of the lamas, the latter suddenly stopped speaking and assumed the attentive attitude of one who is listening to a message being delivered to him, although he, Houck, never heard a word. "Then I must go," suddenly broke forth the Lama, as if in response to the message. "Go where?" inquired the astonished Lama of Jehovah. "Houck, and with whom are you talking?" "To the lamasery of blank," was the quiet answer. "The chaperon wants me. It was he who summoned me." Now this lamasery was many days' journey from Kunbum, in which the conversation was taking place. But what seemed to astonish Houck the most was that, instead of setting off on his journey, the Lama simply walked into a sort of cupola room on the roof of the house in which they lived, and another Lama, after exchanging a few words, followed them to the terrace by the means of the ladder, and passing between them, locked and barred his companion in. Then turning to Houck, after a few seconds of meditation, he smiled and informed the guest that he had gone. "But how could he? Why, you have locked him in, and the room has no issue," insisted the missionary. "And what good would a door be to him?" answered the custodian. "It is he himself who went away. His body is not needed, and so he left it in my charge." Notwithstanding the wonders which Houck had witnessed during his perilous journey, his opinion was that both of the Lamas had mystified him. But 3 days later, not having seen his habitual friend and entertainer, he inquired after him, and was informed that he would be back in the evening. At sunset, and just as the other Lamas were preparing to retire, Houck heard his absent friend's voice calling as if from the clouds, and his companion to open the door for him. Looking upward, he perceived the travelers outlined behind the lattice of the room where he had been locked in. When he descended, he went straight to the Grand Lama of Kunbum and delivered to him certain messages and orders from the place which he pretended he had just left. Who could get no more information from him as to his aerial voyage, but he always thought, he said, that this farce had something to do with the immediate and extraordinary preparations for the polite expulsion of both the missionaries, himself and Father Gabbett, to Chegortan, a place belonging to the Kumbum. This suspicion of the dairy missionary may have been correct in view of his impudent inquisitiveness and indiscretion. If the Abbé had been versed in Eastern philosophy, he would have found no great difficulty in comprehending both the flight of the Lama's astral body to the distant Lamasery, while his physical frame remained behind, or the carrying on of a conversation with the chaperon that was inaudible to himself. The recent experiments with the telephone in America, to which allusion was made in Chapter 5 of our first volume, but which have been greatly perfected since those pages went to press, prove that the human voice and the sounds of instrumental music may be conveyed along a telegraphic wire at great distance. The Hermetic philosophers taught, as we have seen, that the disappearance from sight of a flame does not imply its actual extinction. It has only passed from the visible to the invisible world, and may be perceived by the inner sense of vision, which is adapted to the things of that other and more real universe. The same rule applies to sound, as the physical ear discerns the vibrations of the atmosphere up to a certain point, and yet definitely fixed, but varying with the individual, so the adept whose interior hearing has been developed can take the sound at this vanishing point and hear its vibrations in the astral light indefinitely. He needs no wires, helices, or sounding boards. His willpower is all sufficient. Hearing with the spirit, time and distance offer no impediments, and so he may converse with another adept at the antipodes with as great ease as though they were in the same room. Fortunately, we can produce numerous witnesses to corroborate our statement who, without being adepts at all, have, nevertheless, heard the sound of aerial music and of the human voice, when neither instrument nor speaker were within thousands of miles of the place where we sat. In their case, they actually heard interiorly, though they had supposed their physical organs of hearing alone were employed. The adept had, by a simple effort of willpower, given them for the brief moment the same perception of the spirit of sound as he himself constantly enjoys. If our men of science could only be induced to test, instead of deriding the ancient philosophy of the trinity of all natural forces, they would go by leaps towards the dazzling truth, instead of creeping snail-like as it is at present. Professor Tyndall's experiments off the South Foreland at Dover in 1875 fairly upset all previous theories of the transmission of sound and those he has made with sensitive flames, bringing him to the very threshold of arcane science. One step further, and he would comprehend how adepts can converse at great distances. But that step will not be taken. Of his sensitive, in truth magical, flame, he says, "The slightest tap on a distant anvil causes it to fall to 7 inches. When a bunch of keys is shaken, the flame so violently agitated and emits a loud roar. The dropping of a sixpence into a hand already containing coin knocks the flame down. The creaking of boots sets it in violent commotion. The crumpling or tearing of a bit of paper, or the rustle of a silk dress, does the same. Responsive to every tick of a watch held near it, it falls and explodes. The winding up of a watch produces tumult. From a distance of 30 yards we may chirrup to this flame and cause it to fall and roar." Repeating a passage from the Fairy Queen, the flame sifts and selects the manifold sounds of my voice, noticing by some slight nod, others by a deep bow, while to others it responds by violent agitation. Such are the wonders of modern physical science, but at what cost of apparatus in carbonic acid and coal gas, of American and Canadian whistles, trumpets, gongs, and bells. The poor heathen have none such impedimenta, but will European science believe it, nevertheless, produce the very same phenomena. Upon one occasion, when, in a case of exceptional importance, an oracle was required, we saw the possibility of what we had previously vehemently denied, namely, a simple mendicant cause a sensitive flame to give responsive flashes without a particle of apparatus. A fire was kindled of branches of the beal tree, and some sacrificial herbs were sprinkled upon it. The mendicant sat nearby, motionless, absorbed in contemplation. During the intervals between the questions, the fire burned low and seemed ready to go out, but when the interrogatories were propounded, the flames leaped, roaring skyward, flickered, bowed, and sent fiery tongues flaring towards the east, west, north, or south, each motion having its distinct meaning in a code of signals well understood. Between whiles it would sink to the ground, and the tongues of flame would lick the sod in every direction and suddenly disappear, leaving only a bed of glowing embers. When the interview with the flame spirits was at an end, the bhikshu, mendicant, turned towards the jungle where he abode, keeping up a wailing, monotonous chant to the rhythm of which the sensitive flame kept time, not merely like Professor Tyndall's when he read the Fairy Queen by simple motions, but by a marvelous modulation of hissing and roaring until he was out of sight. Then, as if its very light were extinguished, it vanished and left a bed of ashes before the astonished spectators. Both in western and eastern Tibet, as in every other place where Buddhism predominates, there are two distinct religions, the same as it is in Brahmanism, the secret philosophy and the popular religion. The former is that of the followers of the doctrine of the sect of Sutrantika. They closely adhere to the spirit of Buddha's original teachings, which show the necessity of intuitional perception and all deductions therefrom. These do not proclaim their views nor allow them to be made public. All compounds are perishable, were the last words uttered by the lips of the dying Gautama while preparing under the sal tree to enter into nirvana. Spirit is the sole, elementary, and primordial unity, and each of its rays is immortal, infinite, and indestructible. Beware the illusions of matter. Buddhism was spread far and wide over Asia, and even farther, by Dhammasukha. He was the grandson of the miracle worker Chandragupta, the illustrious king who rescued the Punjab from the Macedonians, if they were ever at Punjab at all, and received Megasthenes at his court in Pataliputra. Dharmasukha was the greatest king of the Mayura dynasty. From a reckless profligate and atheist, he had become Prayadasi, the beloved of the gods, and never was the purity of his philanthropic views surpassed by any earthly ruler. His memory has lived for ages in the hearts of the Buddhists, and has been perpetuated in the humane edicts engraved in several popular dialects on the columns and rocks of Allahabad, Delhi, Gujarat, Peshawar, Orissa, and other places. His famous grandfather had united all India under his powerful scepter. When the Nagas, or serpent worshippers, of Kashmir had been converted through the efforts of the apostles sent out by the Sthaviras of the Third Councils, the religion of Gautama spread like wildfire. Granthara, Kabul, and even many of the satrapies of Alexander the Great accepted the new philosophy. The Buddhism of Nepal being the one which may have been said to have diverged less than any other from the primeval ancient faith. The Lamanism of Mongolia and Tartary, Mongolia, and Tibet, which is the direct offshoot of this country, may be thus shown to be the purest Buddhism, for we say it again, Lamanism, properly, is but an external form of rites. The Upasakas, or Upasakis, or male or female semi-monastics and semi-laymen, have equally with the Lama monks themselves to strictly abstain from violating any of Buddha's rules, and must study Maipo and every psychological phenomena as much. Those who become guilty of any of the 5 sins lose all right to congregate with the pious community. The most important of these is not to curse upon any consideration, for the curse returns upon the one that utters it, and often upon his innocent relatives who breathe the same atmosphere with him. The law of returns. To love each other and even our bitterest enemies, to offer our lives even for animals, to the extent of abstaining from defensive arms, I disagree vehemently with that. To gain the greatest of victories by conquering oneself, I agree with that. To avoid all vices, I disagree with that. To practice all virtues, I agree with that in part, especially humility and mildness, for the most part. To be obedient to superiors, to cherish and respect parents, old age, learning, virtuous and holy men, to provide food, shelter, and comfort for men and animals, to plant trees on the roads and dig wells for the comfort of travelers. Such are the moral duties of Buddhists. Every ani, or bhikshuni nun, is subjected to these laws. And that is where we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. We're about halfway through. We are getting a little bit long, and so hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of unconventional, or a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold several unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I'm here to dispense truth, and today's lesson had a lot of truth to dispense. The things that I speak about are because I have experienced them. If I am unclear on something, hopefully I am clear about that. There are things that may be possible that I don't know, but there are things that are possible that I absolutely do. I am trying to relay as openly and as honestly as I possibly can the things which I know to be true. The balance between the virtues and vices is an absolute fact. You can achieve results either by adhering exclusively to the virtues or exclusively to the vices. Your results will be manifested according to the laws of return and the other 8 laws, or all of the 8 laws of creation. That will govern what return you get, but you will get a return regardless. You can do things whether they are good or evil, whether they are properly aligned or not. You can still achieve things. The purpose that I am attempting to impart is that you can do these things with correct intention and receive correct results by finding the balance between the virtues and vices. You can, through prayer, fasting, and meditation, take direct control of the electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the Holy Spirit, at least in part. I have, without a doubt, affected change within my own body. I have, you can be doubtful of, affected change outside of my body. I have relayed those in other places, and we're already a little bit long, so I'm not going to get into it today, but I have affected things outside of myself as much as within myself. I get into much greater detail in the Infinite Integration playlist, where we take it step by step and grab new levels of understanding as we go along, because you are responsible for the things which you know and practice. So if you know that something is wrong and you do it anyways, that is more, that requires a greater penalty than if you unintentionally do something wrong. So we normally start by talking about levels of responsibility before we get into anything specific. Everything that I have relayed here is general. It is something that you can do, but it will take much experimentation for you to be able to enact it for yourself. But if you go to the Infinite Integrations playlist, you can be guided through the levels of responsibility, so that you can do this without repercussions that are negatively impactful. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was said today. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me deal with in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.